Hi, Sarah. So, Sarah, tell us a little about you and the synagogue.
Yes, I'm Cantor Sarah Myerson, and I serve Kayne Street Synagogue. Their full name is actually Congregation Beth Israel Anshe MS. This is my fourth year there, so I started half a year before the pandemic, which was, I mean, the past few years for everyone have been very strange, but if you can imagine starting with the community in the summer and planning a full year of holidays and then getting to Purim and then that's it, and you don't have a normal Pesach for a few years. So it's been now it feels like I'm really starting to get to know people that uh, hadn't I hadn't met in the first 6 months and weren't comfortable coming back during the pandemic. Now it feels like I'm still meeting new people and still getting to know parts of the community.
Sarah, how did you get to be a cantor?
I studied at JTS. It's a 5 year seminary program leading to ordination.
Was it
So I was
was
in.
it in your early background that made you decide this? Or are you a musician particularly? How did it happen?
Oh, how did I decide to become a
Yeah.
cantor? Yeah. Well, so that's an interesting question because when I was growing up, I went to public school, I went to Hebrew school, and both the rabbi and the cantor of my community when I was training to become bat mitzvah thought that I should become a rabbi or a cantor someday. I moved around a lot growing up, but I moved back and forth between the United States and Australia mostly. I became bat mitzvah in Ohio at Shari Tefillah in Cleveland. Yeah. Um, and they had a very musical rabbi who actually we connected with in. He was in Australia when I was very little, and then Ohio later on. So it was nice to have a close relationship with some clergy in different parts of the world, actually. Anyway, so I thought at that point that I was going to be an actor, singer, dancer on Broadway, but I started to realize later in my teens that that didn't work very well with religious observance. You can't really keep Shabbos in a traditional sense if you're going to be doing shows on Friday nights. And as I was starting to work as a musician and a dancer, I would go to these extraordinary lengths to try and stay in walking distance of venues and not get paid on Shabbos. And, you know, it was just too much. So then I started thinking more seriously about how could I bring this love of art and music and creative expression into a Jewish context where those things wouldn't be in conflict. And that is what led me to Cantorial school, obviously.
Mm, great.
So, were you raised in a conservative community, or is this King Street a new one for you?
Well, I would say that we joined whatever was the local egalitarian synagogue. So
Uh,
that might mean reform, it might mean conservative, it might mean unaffiliated. Yeah, so Kayne Street is USCJ affiliated, meaning we're affiliated with the conservative movement. But like most communities, I think you'll find that there are some people that are there that are very religiously observant, and there are some people there that are totally secular, and for whatever reason, they all feel home in this community. So I think you'll find that no matter the label or the affiliation of the community, there's a wide variety of different practices amongst the people.
It's a very interesting community. Just as an aside, Brooklyn Jewish Historical Initiative, which is, of course, organizing this interview, um, we looked at Kane Street very interestingly a couple of years ago for the centennial of World War One,
Hmm.
and noticed how many of the congregants from Kane Street had served in World War One, and
Yeah.
how many of the families of the congregants were still connected to Kane Street. Uh,
Yeah.
Still lived in and around the area. It was
I
fascinating. I mean,
think
there's a wall up in the lobby of the synagogue that lists all the names of the soldiers who some survived, but some sadly did not, but that their families are still connected. And I find that, the history of the synagogue is very interesting.
yeah, it is. It's quite remarkable for Brooklyn that we, on the one hand, I think we say that we're the oldest community that's still serving its original neighborhood. And on the other hand, that even with all of the demographic shifts, we have some families that are four generations in this community, which is remarkable for Brooklyn, known as a home of immigrants and immigration and moving back and forth. But we seem to have a really strong loyalty over a century.
You told me on Monday you did a Mishabera?
Yeah, this is something we started during the pandemic. We have a 5-minute ritual for healing every Monday at 8:30 a.m. on Zoom. People get together. We have a prayer for healing. People share the names of people they're praying for in their lives. We have a kavanah, an intention. And I think these kinds of 5-minute rituals are really necessary because a lot of our services are very long and a lot of our programming can be very long, and there's something very appealing about just a sort of drop in for 5 minutes here or there, something like Havdalah, which can be really short, and still fulfilling. And for some people, that's what they need. They don't have the attention span, or they aren't able to commit the amount of time for a 3-hour morning service, but to be able to pop into something that is self-enclosed and short, I think is really valuable.
That's a gift.
Yeah.
It's a great gift.
The initial idea was to compare cantors and music at different synagogues around Brooklyn. I just want to dig a little bit further into your background. What was your undergraduate degree in?
I went to a conservatory. I studied composition.
Really?
And while I was there, I did a senior thesis on Salomon Zolzer and the Vienna Rite as a model for balancing Western classical aesthetic with the importance of maintaining nusach as a way of navigating modernity while keeping tradition. Because I feel like that's what the whole conservative movement is about, navigating modernity and maintaining tradition.
Were you planning to teach at some point?
I've been teaching since I was in 10th grade. I started working in the Hebrew school as an assistant for kids with special needs. And then I started teaching B'nai Mitzvah when I was in 11th grade because I had learned trope and method when I became bat mitzvah, and then I was in a community where no one knew that. So they brought me in to teach all the kids trope. Yeah.
Great. How would you characterize your vocal style? Is it more classical in approach, or is it both?
Not at all. I have taken many years of vocal lessons, but I don't sound like a classically trained singer.
And how does that fit in with your synagogue? Is that the style that they enjoy?
Yeah, I think they like that. Well, so I'm the first cantor that's worked there. So until I came there, services were largely lay-led. And a big part of my role is coordinating our lay leaders and helping them learn more and making sure that there's a balance of different styles and also some predictability of repertoire.
I was at your service a couple of weeks ago and I noticed no instruments, no guitars.
Saturday morning, no instruments.
But I did notice rhythm. So somebody was either pounding with
Yeah, people sort of drum their hands on the lectern or on siddurim. Friday nights we have instruments, but Saturday mornings we don't.
What does that represent in terms of the philosophy of the place?
Yeah, I would say that more of the people who are more traditionally minded come on Saturday morning and care about that, and that is a more lay-led service, to be honest. And Friday night, really, it didn't used to have instruments, but during the pandemic, when we moved to Zoom, we came to the understanding that the people who were comfortable using Zoom on Shabbat were also the people that were comfortable with instruments. And so since we were taking away the joy of being in person and connecting in harmony, we wanted to bring something in to replace all of that. And so we brought in instruments on Zoom during the pandemic. And then when we came back in person, it was a negotiation of, do we want this to be every week, some weeks? And so we've sort of played around with different ways of doing that.
Great.
Yeah.
The question I was going to ask has to do with what is the decision-making process in terms of crafting the music for a service?
Yeah. Well, so the services that I'm leading, which are almost, bless you, almost every Friday night I lead. And so I'm choosing the repertoire for that. And we often have specially themed Friday nights. So we just had Sephardi Mizrahi Shabbat in honor of Kaftet in November, honoring the cultures that experienced the exile and expulsion in the 40s and 50s. We have Klezmer Shabbat coming up at the end of the month. We have Pride Shabbat in June, Women's Shabbat around March 8th. So there are different sort of theme Shabbatot where we're picking repertoire around that theme. But in general, I'm picking a balance of sort of, oh, this is going to be a week when we have a lot of younger kids and we want shorter melodies with fewer words that are more participatory, or, you know,
Mhm.
different considerations for Friday night. For Saturday morning, I lead either Shacharit or Musaf almost every week, and then I'm picking my own repertoire for that. And the rest, if people want guidance, I'm happy to offer it. But really, we have a very wide variety of repertoire that is chosen. Yeah.
To what extent does the Nusach tradition shape your decisions?
Yeah, I love Nusach. I think it's very important. I usually lead in Eastern Ashkenazi Nusach, and I try to choose melodies that weave in and out of that well. When I say Nusach, I mean broadly liturgical chanting traditions.
Mhm.
And I think that's important to most of our lay leaders as well. We do have some lay leaders that lead with lots of melodies and sort of through form melodies. I know we're going to talk about Kedusha later, but there is a real value placed on Nusach and being able to chant through text traditionally. It is a community where you can pause and the congregation will come in with chants heterophonically, and it'll be everyone chanting sort of the same thing in sort of the same way at sort of the same time, but a little bit messily. And I think we do value that traditional Ashkenazi aesthetic. I think so. I mean, in terms of the shaping aesthetic, the major force, you can't have any conversation without talking about Rabbi Israel Goldfarb, who was the rabbi for a long time at Kayne Street, and he was a big driver of bringing in congregational melody. Um, that said, we still do his announcing the new month, his Birkat HaChodesh, which is a cantorial recitative, and it has some bits that are sung by the congregation, but that is a beloved part of our musical repertoire that we still sing this Goldfarb bit of Chazanut, you know?
So let's switch now to the section about the characteristics of your music.
Hmm.
Talk a little bit about your intentionality around Lechadodi on Friday
Yeah.
night.
Lachadodi is always sung participatorily. That's a
Yeah,
word, right?
that works.
Yeah. All the way through. There are about 5 melodies that we use that we cycle through.
Hmm.
One for the first half and one for the second half. Usually something in major for the first half, something in minor for the second half.
Hmm.
Unless it's a special occasion. So for Sfirat HaOmer, for example, we use the Sphira melody for the first half.
Mhm.
For the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, we're using the I call it the Drei Wochen
Yeah,
melody for those 3 weeks for the first half. So there's some seasonal melodies that we bring in.
Your congregation participates with you, don't they?
Yeah.
For
I
Lachad-
think so. This is a bigger conversation, but I think listening is also participating, because if I was speaking to a room and there was no one in it, there wouldn't be no participation. But when I'm speaking and you're listening, Rita, you're participating actively. There would be no point in me speaking if you weren't there. You know what I mean? So I think if we start to think of the congregation listening to the rabbi's Dvar Torah, the rabbi's sermon, as participating, then we can also start to think of listening to chazonas as participating. We can start to think of sitting there silently and letting the sound wash over you as participating actively.
in terms of Lechadodi, there's an old tradition of improvisation during verses that I'm sure you encountered when you were at the seminary. None of that happens at Kayne Street, right?
I don't do that because I really see Lechadodi as being a climax moment, and I want them to be with me there.
Mm-hmm.
Also because I know that after that I'm gonna do a recitative. I always do a shtickle chazanis, a little bit of chazanis for Psalm 93, and I'm doing a fair amount of improvising in the ends of the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat leading up to that. So Lechadodi is Davka, the one that I don't do improvising on.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Would you like to illustrate the Lechadodi for us? One that you
Sure.
use on a regular basis, or give
Yeah.
us a taste of what your synagogue does?
Okay, great. So I'm gonna lead. I'll do a chorus and a verse of an example of what it would sound like for the first half on a typical week, and this will be one of the 5. And then I'll do a chorus and a verse of the what would be the second half, sort of your major melody and your minor melody.
Great, thank you.
Okay. L'chad dodi l'krat kala b'nei Shabbat nekabela. L'chad dodi l'krat kala b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'tibur echad. Yishmi'anu el hamyuchad Adonai echad v'shmo echad. L'shem lo tiferet v'litila. L'chad dodi l'krat kala b'nei Shabbat nekabela. L'chad dodi l'krat kala b'nei Shabbat nekabela. That's a melody that I wrote in 2016, and people like it, and we do it a lot, and that makes me feel good too, because it's nice to have my own Torah, my own music out there. And for the second half, we'll often go into an Ashkenazi folk melody. Let's see. Lo tevoshi velo tikami ma tishtochachi u'ma tehevi bach yechesu ani ami v'nivneta ir al tila lecha dodi likrat kala b'nei Shabbat nekabela.
Lovely. Let's turn now to the Kedusha. What's your strategy with regard to that in terms of participatory sections, solo sections?
Generally, we follow the Ashkenazi practice, and this is for Kedusha and for a lot of other prayers as well, where each section is anticipated by the congregation and then repeated by the leader. So I do a mix of nusach and melodies, unless it's a special week where I'm doing it all in, makam. Other congregants, I would say, most congregants lead in that way as well, where they're pausing and they're waiting for the community to come in first. And when I say congregants, I mean lay leaders that are leading Musaf. We do have a few that, as I said earlier, like these longer form melodies where everyone is singing everything at the same time without the pauses. And I would say also our children do it that way in our youth and family minyanim. So for them, if they really only go to those, then when they become B'nai Mitzvah and they lead Musaf, which most of our students do, they're also leading through without the breaks. Some of our students who come more often to the downstairs sanctuary services have more of that sense of pause and wait. But there's a mix, I would say.
Great.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to tell us about your approach to Kedusha before we ask you to sing one?
Yeah. I think we shouldn't forget that it's about holiness and that we should be focusing on the special and the sacred and the uplifting. And I love the spiritual and the soulful melodies that some people bring into it, but I think with some of them we lose that sense of uplift. So I think that's just a really important thing to have in mind. What are we trying to accomplish in this prayer? And I think it's a sense of communal holiness.
Before you start, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you have your own sense of what it is you want to bring to the congregation and it's new for you, how do they participate?
Yes. So it really depends. If it's a melody that's going to repeat a few times, then I'll introduce it without words first, because then people have a chance to learn the melody before they're trying to grapple with words. That's generally how I would do it. The other thing is that I have a Cantor's Corner that goes in every Friday email, and if I know that I'm going to be introducing something, then I can put it in there, and then people will get it in advance. The other thing I can do is send music to 30 or 40 people who are stronger singers and who like a bit of a challenge and welcome something new, and if I can get them on board with something far enough in advance, then that'll make that more of a success. The third option is to teach it to the Hebrew school, and then I have a whole cadre of children that know it.
That's great. Do you daven facing them or away from them?
No, on Saturday mornings, currently, I am at the front of the room facing the ark.
So I think it'd be good to hear your Kedusha.
All right. So again, this is not what I would do every week, but this is an example of what I might do if I had to get through Kedusha in less than 7 minutes. All right. I'll leave out the congregational pauses, and you can just assume that I might do some sort of like a wave to indicate where I would normally do them, but if I wait for them, then we really won't get through it. Okay. Na'aritzecha v'nakdishecha kesod siach Sarfe Kodesh, Hamakdishim Shimcha Bakodesh, Kakatuv Al Yad Nevi'echa, Vekara Ze El Ze Ve'amar. And they're going through Kadosh and Kivodo. It's really hard to do this sitting down. Okay, sorry. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzavaot, Melech kol haaretz kevodo, kevodo mahalei olam, Misharetav shoalim ze lazeh, Ayem mekom kevodo, Leumatam baruch yomeru. They're chanting through Baruch Kavod and Mimkomo. Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo. Mimkomo hu yifen. Mimkomo hu yifen barachamim. Veyachon am. Ham yachadim shemo. Erev avoker b'chol yom tamid pamayim be'ahava shema omerim. They're chanting through Shema and Hu Eloheinu.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hu Eloheinu Hu Avinu. Hu Malkeinu Hu Moshienu. Vehu Yashmienu Berachamav Shenit. Shenit le'nei kol chai, liot lachem le'Elohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem, u'v'durei kodshecha katuv le'mor. Yimloch Adonai le'olam Elohech tzion l'dor v'dor, hallelujah, l'dor v'dor. Then we do the Sol Zim to end. I'm sure you have plenty of examples of that. And we'll end in Nusach. Ki al-melech gadol v'kadosh ata. Baruch Ata Adoshem Ha'el HaKadosh.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. What a gift. What a gift you give to Kayne Street.
It's nice to be able to share my voice with people in service of prayer and community.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Sarah. It was our Cantor Sarah.
Sarah.
It was really lovely getting to hear about your background and getting to hear your art. It was very nice. Thank you for being part of this.
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope I've done Kayne Street proud.
Thank you for your wonderful gift. Bye.